Come sit by the fire, and if you have the time, I'll tell you the full story of the 3 nights when everyone slept through, including you. Tell me something. When you close your eyes at night and the room falls away and your thoughts finally stop screaming at you, where do you go? Not your dreams? Those little parades of nonsense your brain strings together to keep you entertained. I'm not asking about the flying, or the teeth falling out, or the old crush that suddenly appears in the hallway of a school you barely remember. I'm asking about the gap, the dark interval between drifting off and waking up, the part you never bring back with you, those missing minutes or hours where your mind is offline and something else could be standing over you and you would never know. Have you ever really thought about that? What if, during that gap, your body isn't as alone as you think? What if something stops in the doorway, leans in just close enough to listen to your breathing, and decides whether you're worth remembering? And now I'll make it worse for you. What if one night it wasn't just you? What if the entire world went into that gap at the same time? No night shift, no insomniacs scrolling their phones at 3 in the morning, no truckers on coffee and nicotine, no security guards watching empty lobbies on grainy screens, no one crying quietly at their kitchen table at 2:47 a.m., staring at the bills. Just silence. Every mind on earth switched to off in the same instant. Every pair of eyes closing, every light of consciousness going dark, like someone unplugged us. If that happened, what do you think could walk through the world while we were all gone? What could move down the streets, through the houses, over sleeping bodies and never be seen? What could be done to us, to our minds, to our memories, to our very sense of time, with no witnesses left to object? I am not asking these questions to scare you for the sake of it. I'm asking because 3 years ago, something very close to that happened. We call it different things now. Some people say the triple blackout. Some prefer the lost nights. The officials, the ones that still pretend it's all a misunderstanding, call it a statistical anomaly in subjective sleep reporting. I call it the 3 nights everyone slept through. And I mean everyone in the way that matters. You might think you didn't. You might remember going to work or staying up late or arguing with someone or watching some film you half remember. You might swear those nights were normal, but memories are malleable. Time is more flexible than you've been told. And if something had its hands on the world, wouldn't it start by getting its hands on your sense of time? I didn't find out about it through the news. Of course not. They never break the truth first. I found out the same way I find most things now, buried in the noise of late-night forums and forgotten message boards, in places where people post about the things they're too embarrassed to say to a doctor. It began like this. Anyone else's sleep tracker bugged? Mine says I slept 31 hours straight. My boss is pissed, but I remember going to work. Then, Fitband shows I was asleep from July 11th to July 14th. No way. I had shifts. I talked to people, right? Then more, calendar skipped the 12th. I swear I wrote in my journal that day. The page is blank now. At first, it looked like what skeptics always like to say. Glitches, faulty devices, people misremembering things because human memory is a joke. But the posts kept coming. not just from one country, not just in one language. Japan, Norway, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, Canada. People with different brands of devices, different lifestyles, different routines, all noticing strange matching gaps in the same 3 nights. Some posted screenshots from their wearable devices, lines of data that showed a solid block of deep sleep 3 nights in a row, with almost no interruptions, no tosses, no awakenings, no REM spikes. Just a flat, heavy bar of unconsciousness, like the brain had been put into low-power mode. You know what the normal world did? They laughed. They blamed firmware updates, manufacturing defects. One more reason not to trust tech, they said, while checking their phones again. The companies denied everything, of course. They always do. But then the medical records started to surface. Doctors comparing notes in private groups, complaining that their patients all reported feeling extra rested that week, despite EEG data showing us something cool. Off. Sleep studies that recorded universal drops in brain activity not seen in normal sleep cycles. Hospitals noticing that during those 3 nights, emergency room admissions dropped sharply. Fewer bar fights, fewer crashes, fewer overdoses, fewer panic attacks. 3 nights where people just stayed in bed, and all of this would have been brushed away, filed in some dusty folder under weird but not important, if not for one problem. Not everyone slept. A very small number of people resisted whatever came over the world. They stayed awake, or half awake, while everything around them dimmed. They watched their families slump deeper into the mattress. They watched their phones die, their clocks falter, the very air outside their windows become still, and they saw things moving in that stillness. I didn't find them easily. Most of them refused to talk. Those who did rarely made it through an entire conversation without shaking or going quiet for long stretches, staring at something just over my shoulder. But that's not where this story starts for you. For you, this begins with me, because I was one of the people who almost woke up. On the 3rd night, not the 1st, not the 2nd, only the 3rd, something went wrong. Whatever held the world in its grip slipped just for a moment, and I surfaced. You know that feeling when you wake up a second before your alarm, your body too heavy to move, your thoughts half formed. Now imagine that, but multiplied into dread, a thick, suffocating heaviness pinning you to the bed, not because you're tired, but because something doesn't want you to move. I remember a pressure in my skull, like fingers pressing gently but firmly against the inside of my face. My breathing slow, deeper than it should have been, like someone had turned down the volume on my lungs. Sound was wrong, distant, underwater, and I remember my eyes opening, not properly, not the crisp clarity of morning, just a narrow slit, enough to see my bedroom window, enough to see the street beyond it. My neighborhood is quiet. Old houses, fading paint, tired trees, streetlights that buzz when it rains. I know the pattern of night there, the late dog walker, the last bus, the glow of televisions in the windows of insomniacs too stubborn to surrender. On that night, there was none of that. The street was empty, not just empty of people, but empty of activity. Every window dark, every house still, no flicker of a screen, no distant hum of traffic, no wind in the leaves. It felt like the world had been paused. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a tall shape at the far end of the street, halfway between two lamp posts. Too symmetrical to be a tree, too still to be a person. It stood in the road, angled slightly towards the houses, towards the bedrooms, towards the people. Slowly, it turned its head, if you can call it a head. If you can call that turning, when the motion was too smooth, too deliberate, like someone rotating a camera on a tripod. One by one, it regarded each house, my neighbors, the couple across the street, the empty rental. It didn't walk. It shifted, as if space was folding under it, bringing it closer without the need to take a step. The distance between lamp posts seemed to collapse. The angle of its limbs didn't resemble bone. It was wrong in ways I couldn't process in that half-conscious state. Wrong in a way my mind tried very hard not to store properly. The last thing I recall is the sense that it had turned its attention to my house, not to the building itself, not to the roof or the door, to my window, to me, and then nothing. I woke 11 seconds later. At least that's what the device on my wrist says. A sudden spike in heart rate, a flurry of brain activity, then a full awakening at 6:47 a.m., just as my alarm began to ring. If that had been all, a strange half-dream, a few odd numbers on a chart, I might have written it off as well. But the world was full of people like me that week. People who woke up feeling wrong. People who checked their phones and saw 3 nights of uninterrupted sleep registered, despite swearing they had woken up to use the bathroom, to get a drink, to check a crying child. People who went to work and found co-workers asking, "Did last night feel strange to you?" It took months for the patterns to emerge, years for the data to leak, for the right people to compare the right sets of numbers. By then, the official explanations were already in place. Firmware glitch, solar interference, psychological suggestion after viral posts. They always have a list ready, but those explanations fall apart quickly when you talk to someone who stayed fully awake. I found the first one by accident. A woman in her 40s writing under a pseudonym on a forum dedicated to sleep paralysis. Her post was simple. "I didn't sleep those 3 nights. I watched something walk through my town. If anyone else stayed awake, I need to know I'm not alone." I messaged her, "Carefully, you have to be cautious in those places. For every terrified witness, there are 10 pranksters and 5 deeply unwell people." What she told me did not sound like pranking. It sounded like a confession, like the first crack in a dam. She described walking through her apartment building at 3 in the morning, stepping over the bodies of neighbors who had collapsed in hallways, on stairwells, in front of their doors. Not dead, just deeply, unnaturally asleep. She described the sky being darker than usual, as if some layer of distant light had been peeled away. She described an electrical buzzing in the air whenever she approached a window, the faint smell of ozone and rust. And she described figures, not just one, like I saw, dozens, moving in pairs, occasionally in threes, gliding down streets and across fields, stopping at houses, leaning close to doors, windows, walls. "They were taking inventory," she wrote. "That's the only way I can describe it. like inspectors, walking through a warehouse of unconscious bodies. She said she screamed at them once, a panicked, impulsive act of defiance. They didn't react, not the way we do. One of them simply turned very slowly to face her directly, and although she couldn't see a face, she felt something make contact. Something pushed gently against the front of her thoughts. They knew I was awake, she said, and they weren't expecting that. Do you understand what that implies? Whatever came over us during those 3 nights, it assumed compliance. It assumed you would surrender without question to the silence and the dark. It assumed there would be no witnesses left to tell the story afterward. That woman is not the only one. I have gathered accounts now from multiple continents, multiple cultures, multiple languages, all saying the same thing. The world fell into an unnatural sleep. Something walked freely through our towns and cities, and a handful of people, a tiny overlooked fraction, stayed conscious long enough to see it. One of them saw more than all the others combined. Most witnesses hid. They stayed behind curtains, under beds and closets, trying not to breathe too loudly while these visitors, these inspectors, glided past. But one person didn't. One person followed them. He tracked their route through his neighborhood. He watched them pause at intersections, tilt their heads toward landmarks, raise their arms as if feeling the invisible shape of something in the air. He followed them to the very edge of town, and he saw where they came from. I've spent the last 3 years trying to verify every detail of his story, checking timestamps, location data, corroborating background events. I believe him. I believe him more than I believe the official line, the corporate statements, the nothing to see here, move along press conferences. I believe him because when he describes the thing that turned to look at him, I recognize the way his voice changes. It's the same way my own voice changes when I talk about the shape in my street. Fear shapes a certain kind of honesty. He is the closest thing I have to a witness who watched the whole event play out while the rest of us lay helpless. And now, I think it's time you heard what he saw. But before I tell you his story, let me ask you one last question for tonight. If you discovered that the 3 safest nights of sleep you ever had were the ones where something else was in control of your mind, would you really want to know what it did with you while you were gone? Before we go any further, I need you to understand something about the man whose account you're about to hear. Most people who stayed awake during those nights fell into 2 groups, those who hid and those who broke. But he watched, not out of bravery or curiosity or defiance. He watched because he couldn't not watch. His name was Jonas Hallberg, 48 years old, a maintenance worker at a hydroelectric plant in northern Sweden, a man whose life, until the 3 nights, could not have been more ordinary. Long shifts, coffee strong enough to burn the bitter out of winter mornings, a quiet, predictable existence, which, perhaps, is why he noticed the silence sooner than most. The first night began with a power fluctuation at the plant, nothing dramatic, just a brief dip on the meters. Jonas thought it was an equipment issue, but when he radioed the others for assistance, nobody answered, not because the radios were malfunctioning, because every worker on site had fallen into an unnatural, dreamless sleep within seconds of each other. He found them slumped over consoles, collapsed in hallways, lying on the floor as if someone had drained their strings. Pulse steady, breathing deep, eyelids twitchless. He checked the nearest monitoring station. Every city light on the valley display, tens of thousands of residential grids, dimmed to low consumption levels at the same moment. To Jonas, it felt as if the world had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. He tried calling emergency services, nothing. He checked the radios, the landlines, the staff phones, all dead. That was the moment he stepped outside. He described it to me in a whisper, as if the memory itself was something that still listened for him in the dark. He said the wind had stopped, not slowed, stopped, as if the movement of the air was an indulgence the world could no longer afford. Snowflakes hung suspended like dust motes, drifting so slowly they might as well have been frozen in time. The valley below him was a soft ocean of sleeping roofs, every window black, every chimney still, and above it all, the sky had taken on a strange metallic undertone, not brighter, not darker, just altered, like a bruise beneath the clouds. For the first night, Jonas wandered in confusion, believing something catastrophic had happened. A gas leak, a biological event, an attack, anything with an explanation rooted in human error. It was on the second night that he stopped looking for human explanations, because that was when he saw them. He first noticed the movement at the edge of the forest, a silhouette gliding between the trees, tall enough to be a man, but too narrow, too fluid in its posture, as if its limbs obeyed a different arrangement of joints. It paused at the tree line, then stepped out into the open. Jonas said it moved like water being poured uphill, smooth, effortless, purposeful, as if gravity was a suggestion, not a rule. The creature walked directly toward the first farmhouse, not rushed, not hesitant, studying. It leaned close to the window, tilting its head like a listener trying to catch a faint melody. Then it placed one long, impossibly thin hand against the glass. Jonas said the window fogged instantly. From the inside, he watched in horrified stillness as it traced a small circle with its fingertip, a symbol, a mark. And as it stepped back, another figure emerged from the forest. Then another. Dozens! They spread across the valley with quiet precision, each approaching sleeping homes, pausing, listening, marking, then moving on in coordinated arcs like surveyors mapping an unseen structure. Jonas tried to run at first. The human instinct to flee was stronger than any curiosity. But something, perhaps shock, perhaps the cold logic of survival, made him stop. If he ran, he might draw their attention. If he hid, he might be found. If he followed them quietly, he might learn why they were here. It was this last impulse that altered the course of his life. And ours. He spent the second night shadowing their path through the valley, careful to keep his distance, careful not to let the crunch of snow betray him. He noticed patterns. Every creature paused at the same angle when approaching a home. Every gesture was mirrored, synchronized, as if part of a ritual older than memory. And then came the sound, a low, vibrating hum that did not come from their bodies, but from the air itself, a resonance that trembled through Jonas's teeth, down his spine, into the marrow of his bones, a sound that made his eyes water and his vision blur at the edges. He told me that it felt like being observed not from the outside, but from within, as if something behind his own thoughts was turning its head. By the time dawn approached, or whatever passed for dawn in that frozen valley, Jonas had seen enough to know the truth. These beings did not come to harm us. Not yet. They came for something far more methodical. They came to catalog us, to assess, to map, to measure. And on the third night, they expanded their search. Not just windows, not just houses. They began marking people. Jonas saw the first marking at 4:23 a.m. A shift worker asleep in his parked truck, engine still running. One of the beings placed its palm gently on the windshield, and the glass cracked in a perfect spiral around the man's face. Jonas didn't tell me what the creature did next, not in detail, but he said the shape of the man's shadow changed afterward. A shadow should follow a body. This one didn't. Not entirely. And that brings us to the final thing Jonas revealed before our interview ended. The thing that made my pulse stop cold. He wasn't the only one watching the creatures. The creatures were watching him. One of them, a taller one, its body sharper, more defined, had paused in its work halfway through the valley. It turned its head. Not to the house, not to the sleeping family inside, to him, directly, as if it had known where he was the entire time. And slowly, it began to approach. Jonas fled, tripping through the snow, scrambling between vehicles, slipping on frozen asphalt. He didn't look back, not until he reached the maintenance station. He barricaded the doors. He waited. The creature never reached him. Or maybe it did, and chose not to enter. He couldn't say. But he told me this. When it looked at me, I felt like I wasn't part of the world it was walking through, like I was the anomaly. And that's what I need you to understand before we continue. If Jonas was the anomaly, what were the rest of us? Before you answer, think carefully. If something moved through our silent world, marking houses, families, and bodies, what do you think it did to the ones that didn't wake up at all? Most people assume the 3 nights were absolute, that every breathing soul on this planet collapsed into the same heavy darkness without exception. That isn't true. A handful of people like Jonas survived the silence. Yes, but more importantly, there were places that survived it too. Not many, not enough to offer comfort, just enough to tell us the truth. If you want to understand what happened during those nights, we need to step away from sleeping cities and walk into the places where consciousness resisted. Places that, by design or by accident, were shielded from whatever fell over the world. Places humanity built to survive the impossible, deep-sea submarines, Antarctic research stations, underground military bunkers, and each one of them recorded something the rest of the world didn't. Let me start with the submarine. The NRS Vesterhav, a Norwegian ballistic submarine, was positioned 200 meters below the Barents Sea during the first of the 3 nights. Military-grade insulation, electromagnetic shielding, a controlled environment. When the sleep wave hit, the crew didn't collapse the way the surface world did. They remained awake, but not untouched, According to the declassified sections of their internal logs, the submarine's lighting system flickered into low power mode at 2:11. Not because of power failure, because the control systems received a command from an unknown input, instructing them to dim for energy conservation. The crew denied giving any such command. Then, at 2:13, the sonar station lit up, not with enemy vessels, not with wails or thermal noise, with echoes, pulses, rhythmic, structured. They came from every direction at once, bouncing off the sea floor, the surface, and the submarine's hull. Patterns that were neither natural nor mechanical. A junior sonar technician described it as like something enormous was exhaling, and the sea was letting us hear its heartbeat. He wasn't exaggerating. The pulses had intervals, specific, repeating sequences, consistent with language. The commander ordered the recording sealed, but when I reviewed a smuggled copy, something struck me immediately. The pulses corresponded to the same resonant hum Jonas heard in the valley. The same frequency, the same cadence, exactly the same. Now let's talk about Antarctica. Most of the research stations reported nothing, at least officially. But one facility, a multinational remote outpost known as Station K-12, experienced an event that still haunts the surviving staff. At precisely 1:04 on the second night, the temperature inside the base rose by 5 degrees in under a minute. Their sensors detected no source of heat, no malfunction, just an unexplained shift. Then the ice outside began to crack, not naturally, not from pressure, in straight geometric lines forming a perfect circle around the station. One scientist described watching the ice expand outward as if something beneath it had pressed upward, something vast, slow, and deliberate. Another researcher, who was outside at the time, said she heard a noise under the ice, a slow scrape, a groan, like the shifting of bone. But the strangest part was the visual anomaly. During those minutes of rising heat and breaking ice, every reflective surface inside the facility, from polished metal to drinking glasses, briefly displayed a silhouette that wasn't in the room. Tall, narrow, bent at the wrong angles, a shape that flickered like a shadow cast by a flame that wasn't there. Station K-12 didn't sleep through the 3 nights, but they witnessed something, and whatever it was aware of their awareness. The recordings were confiscated, but not all of them were destroyed. Now we come to the last and most disturbing place, Bunker Silo 9, a classified underground facility in Finland. It was designed to be electromagnetically silent, isolated from everything above, a place where no signal could enter or exit. And yet, on the third night, at 3:17, a low-frequency vibration passed through every wall, every floor, every piece of equipment, identical to the hum recorded on the submarine. But this time, it said something, not just pulses, not just rhythm, words, or something so close to words that human speech seemed like a lesser version of it. The bunker's environmental sensors, the ones meant to detect gas, chemicals, radiation, began printing symbols onto their thermal paper strips. Not random noise, not static. Symbols that resembled ancient runes, but arranged in sequences too clean, too precise, too mathematical to be primitive. The paper burned hot to the touch. One of the analysts, a woman named Ava, tried to interpret the sequences. She noticed they appeared in sets, a pattern, a code, something trying to be read. And then suddenly, the machine stopped printing. The hum ceased. The moment it ended, the bunker's backup generator turned on by itself, despite the fact that the main power was still running. The generator log showed one single line of text: configuration complete. No one in the bunker knew what that meant, but they all agreed on one thing. Whatever spoke through the bunker systems wasn't trying to communicate with them. It was checking something, scanning, measuring, confirming. And once it finished, it moved on. Do you understand what this means? While the world slept, a presence, something enormous, deliberate, and ancient, scanned us, mapped us, cataloged every mind, and the places that didn't sleep recorded the process. But there was one more recording, one that ties all of this together, one that proves the sleep wasn't random, but by design. A recording from beneath the earth, a recording of a voice speaking through kilometers of rock and soil, a voice that shouldn't exist, a voice that said something even Jonas refused to repeat. Before we continue, I need you to consider something. If something capable of touching every human mind at once needed to confirm that we were configured, what do you think we were being configured for? Before we continue, there's something you must understand about the governments of this world, child. Whenever the impossible happens, they don't panic. They prepare. And they prepared for this long before the 3 nights occurred. We like to believe authority is blind, incompetent, slow to react. But when it comes to events like these, events that threaten the architecture of human reality, governments do not dismiss, ignore, or forget. They classify, and they get to work. After gathering statements from Jonas, the submarine logs, the Antarctic anomalies, and the bunker recordings, I began to cross-reference each account with restricted files I've collected over the years. Patterns emerged quickly. Too quickly. This was not the first time something had swept across human consciousness. There were smaller events, localized, easier to hide. Kazakhstan, 1953. An entire mining town collapsed into sleep for 29 hours. The military sealed it off, blamed toxic exposure, and burned the settlement to the ground within a week. Unofficial casualty reports claim the bodies were found in strange arrangements, as if moved post-mortem. But there was no post-mortem. The townspeople died lying in their beds. Namibia, 1977. A radio station recorded a humming resonance identical to the bunkers. The recording abruptly cut. All 6 employees were later found unconscious, arranged in a perfect circle as if placed intentionally. The Black Lake Incident, 1994. Hikers reported waking in the woods with 3 days missing, tents rearranged, and footprints circling them. Footprints that did not belong to any animal known to science. The events were rare at first. Tiny fractures, localized tests. But after 2001, the events increased in frequency, quietly. Quiet enough to bury under urban legends, weather anomalies, or human error. And then came the 3 nights, the global version, the event they had been preparing for, the agency. During my research, I encountered repeated references to a group known only as Division 7, or simply the Division. Not a country's agency, not a corporation. Something shared, Traces of them appear in emergency cross-border agreements, sealed treaties, and international communications involving dozens of nations, countries that otherwise barely cooperate on anything at all. And every time a sleep anomaly happened, someone from this group appeared in the records, inspecting the site, confiscating recordings, relocating witnesses, sealing data under multinational security laws. The division had one mandate: contain knowledge of the events until they could be fully understood. But after the 3 nights, their behavior changed dramatically. They stopped containing. They began preparing. I gained access to a leaked document from a facility believed to be under division jurisdiction. No header, no signatures, just a single line at the top. NHEI3, Consciousness Penetration Test, Global Scale. NHEI, Non-Human External Influence, the type of entity that tested us. The document was brief, cold, clinical, a summary of what occurred during the 3 nights. Events successful, subjects compliant, neurological mapping complete. Awaiting signal for Phase 2 assimilation. Assimilation? They weren't scanning us for curiosity. They were preparing us for something. And there was one final detail in the leaked file, a reference to a second document labeled Primary Contact, the Sleepless Anomaly. That was Jonas. The division knew about him. They knew about people like him, those who stayed awake, those who resisted, those whose minds couldn't be lulled into the darkness. I didn't know this at the time. Jonas didn't either. He only realized he was being watched when he returned home weeks after the events. You see, Jonas lived alone. He should have been the only person with a key to his home. But when he entered his kitchen, he noticed something wrong. Not dramatic, not violent, just off. His kitchen chair had been moved slightly. His pantry door, always left closed, was open by 2 centimeters. The jacket he hung on the wall had been rotated on its hook. Small things, deliberate things. Someone had been inside his home, and they wanted him to know it. The division visited him several times, each encounter colder than the last. Each time, they asked him to retell exactly what he saw. They acted indifferent, emotionless. But Jonas wasn't stupid. He understood fear when he saw it, and they were afraid. Not of him, of what he had witnessed. They kept returning until they didn't. 3 weeks after their last visit, every trace of Jonas vanished. His house emptied, his phone disconnected, his accounts frozen. The division erased him. I only know what happened next because he managed to send me one final message, an email with no subject, no body text. Just a single audio attachment, a short recording of the same humming resonance, but clearer, sharper, almost spoken. When I ran the audio through all my tools, frequency mapping, spectrogram analysis, cross-referencing with known languages, I got the same result every time. A pattern, a structure, a single repeated phrase, Phase 2 begins. I haven't heard from Jonas since. Now, child, you know why the division tried so hard to bury this. They understand what's coming. They always have. Before we continue, let me ask you something. If an agency this powerful is terrified of what's approaching, What chance do you think the rest of us have when Phase 2 begins? When the 3 nights ended and the world unknowingly returned to its routine, everyone assumed the crisis, whatever it was over. They were wrong. The most frightening consequences always come after the event, when the world has already convinced itself that nothing happened at all. The first signs appeared in people like Jonas, but the world didn't notice because the world didn't know where to look. On paper, the ones who didn't sleep, the sleepless, were anomalies, statistical outliers, a fraction of a fraction, barely enough to study, but they shared something deeper than wakefulness, something the division couldn't hide, something they couldn't fix. They were changing, not mentally, not emotionally. Physically, the first change affected their shadows. Shadows are simple things, predictable. They follow the body. They obey the light. But the shadows of the sleepless began to misbehave. Some detached subtly from their owners, lagging half a second behind every movement. Others stretched unnaturally along walls and floors, even when the light source didn't justify it. Some bent at angles the human body couldn't form. A shadow should be a mirror. These shadows were beginning to look like something else entirely. I interviewed a man named Marcus, a teacher from Hamburg, who woke during the second night, much like I did. For weeks after the event, he felt off, unsettled, like something behind him was watching him through his own outline. He noticed the shadow change when he brushed his teeth one morning. He leaned forward and his reflection moved normally, but his shadow stayed perfectly straight, frozen. When he backed away, the shadow followed, but not with his steps. It dragged itself across the wall as if reluctant to obey. Another sleepless woman, Leanne from Ohio, complained that her reflection delayed when she blinked. Naturally, she blamed stress, sleep deprivation, some neurological fluke, but then her shadow started blinking before she did. These weren't hallucinations. They weren't exhaustion. They were symptoms. I compiled over 100 similar accounts from the sleepless, people from every continent, every climate, every demographic, and every case followed the same progression. Phase 1, shadow drift. Phase 2, reflection delay. Phase 3, emotional detachment. Phase 4, auditory interference. Phase 5, breakdown of body-mind connection. Let me explain these. Phase 1, shadow drift. The shadow begins to detach subtly from the body's movement. This can last days or hours. The sleepless describe feeling observed by an extra presence in the room. Phase 2, reflection delay. The reflection begins reacting fractionally too late or too early. One sleepless survivor claimed her reflection shook its head no, while she was nodding yes. She moved out of her apartment that day. It didn't help. Phase 3, emotional detachment. The sleepless lose the ability to react normally. They describe their emotions as muted, as if someone dimmed a dial in my head. Grandfather voice note, child. This is where the human mind starts realizing it's no longer alone inside its own skull. Phase 4, auditory interference. This is when things get worse. The hum returns, not as an external noise, as an internal one. a low vibration behind the ears, resonating through the teeth and the spine. Some sleepless hear whispers layered beneath the hum, deep, slow, impossible whispers speaking through the bones. One sleepless man in Argentina told me, "It's not speaking to me, it's speaking inside me, like my body is the echo chamber." Phase 5. Breakdown. Most sleepless don't make it this far. The few who do don't stay human. I've seen video footage of one such case, secretly recorded by a daughter who didn't understand what was happening to her father. He was sitting in a chair, unmoving. His shadow stretched across the floor like a stain, reaching almost twice the normal length. As she circled him, calling his name, the shadow turned before he did. Turned, as if attentive, and then he convulsed, violently but silently, as though something else inside him tugged in the wrong direction. His spine bent backward, his head jerked. A horrible wet crack echoed through the room. But what disturbed me most wasn't the physical transformation. It was the expression on his face. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't in pain. He looked empty, calm, as if whatever once lived behind his eyes had stepped out for a moment, leaving the body to twist under new direction. And when it was over, he didn't collapse. He stood up. His daughter ran. She survived because she fled. I've heard the trembling in her voice during the interviews. She said, "He didn't walk like my father. He walked like the thing that visited him during the 3 nights finally decided to see how the body fit." These cases weren't isolated. Similar transformations appeared in rural India, in a village in Belarus, in a small town in Canada, and in a refugee camp outside Tripoli. The division suppressed nearly all of it, but they couldn't suppress the fact that every sleepless person shared identical neurological changes. You know what the imaging showed? Not trauma, not seizures, reconfiguration, as if something had overwritten part of their neural architecture. A mind replaced piece by piece, a shadow replaced piece by piece, a human replaced piece by piece. And if that doesn't terrify you yet, it should, because the sleepless weren't the only ones being changed. We were too. We just didn't wake up in time to witness the process. Now let me ask you something before we move on. If the ones who stayed awake became wrong, what do you think happened to the rest of us while we slept through all 3 nights? You've heard what happened to the sleepless. You've seen the consequences of being awake in a world that was never meant to be observed during those hours. But now, we shift to something far more unsettling. Why did the event happen at all? No action of that scale, no global shutdown of consciousness happens without purpose. Creatures like the ones Jonas saw do not cross into our world out of curiosity. Entities capable of touching the mind of every human simultaneously do not act without intent. After months of collecting data, stolen recordings, and testimonies from places that resisted the sleep wave, something began to emerge, something terrible in its clarity. The hum, the symbols, the reconfigurations, the transformations, the mapping, all of it pointed to a single conclusion. The 3 nights were not an attack. They were not an accident. They were not a test. They were phase 1 of an integration process. Now let me explain what that truly means. The humming language. The hum recorded in the submarine, the Antarctic station, and the Finnish bunker was not random. It wasn't atmospheric pressure or seismic resonance or machinery vibrations. When I isolated the frequencies, I found something horrifying. The hum carried information density far beyond human speech, layered harmonics, mathematical sequences, deep, throbbing pulses at intervals corresponding to neural oscillations in the human brain during REM suppression. The hum wasn't just a sound, it was a command, a mass, global synchronization signal. It aligned billions of human minds into the same receptive frequency, the same vulnerable pattern of unconsciousness. A perfect moment of silence for something to operate. Now, remember the symbols printed in Bunker Silo 9? The ones that burned the thermal paper? The ones that resembled runes? When I compared the patterns from the bunker with the hum's waveform, they aligned. The symbols were a visual representation of the same command language. And that language wasn't aimed at machines, it was aimed at us. Neurological mapping. Every EEG from the 3 nights showed the same state, triptych synchrony, a term that appears in the leaked division documents. It refers to a condition where the mind stops producing distinct dream states. Neural pathways stabilize. The conscious self steps aside. The subconscious becomes accessible. The mind becomes writable. Writable. The division had been tracking micro-events of triptych synchrony for decades. Every time the anomalies preceded unusual behavior, hallucinations, or disappearances. The 3 nights were simply the first time it happened to everyone simultaneously. Every brain on Earth, open, accessible, vulnerable. And something reached in. The global calibration. Using all the suppressed medical data, I found that certain markers, electrical patterns in the brain, were uniformly altered during the event. Just a tiny shift, barely measurable, but consistent in billions of people, like someone had adjusted the baseline settings of the human mind. A recalibration. The division called it Phase 1 alignment. But if alignment was Phase 1, what was Phase 2? The symbol in the sky. You remember the symbol Jonas described seeing above the valley? He thought it was a hallucination, burned into the air like a mirage. But it wasn't unique. Satellite archives, ones that were never meant to be public, showed faint atmospheric distortions in similar shapes above Johannesburg, Marseille, Kyoto, Toronto, and the outskirts of Oslo. The same symbol, the same geometry, the same impossible angles. It is a sigil, not decorative, not ritualistic, a coordinate map, a map of consciousness, human consciousness. And that symbol also appears carved on ancient stones in Babylonia, scratched onto bones found in Siberia, and painted in abandoned temples in rural Peru. Cultures that never had contact with each other. This has happened before, just never at this scale. The sleepless as control subjects. Why did the ones who stayed awake transform? Why were their shadows wrong, their reflections delayed, their emotions eroded? Because they broke the pattern. They were outliers, anomalies, human systems that resisted the calibration. Imagine adjusting the frequency of 1 billion tuning forks, and a few dozen vibrate differently. The system corrects those forks, or removes them. The sleepless weren't cursed. They simply didn't fit the new configuration. The whispered message. Now we come to Jonas's final recording, the one he sent me before vanishing. A clean version of the hum, higher fidelity, closer to the source. When I removed the harmonics and isolated the lowest frequency band, the waveform became unmistakably intentional. It wasn't noise, it was a voice, not human, not mimicking human speech, but shaping sound in a way that carried meaning. It repeated the same phrase, "Phase 2 begins." But there was more. Hidden in the upper harmonic, almost inaudible, was a second, shorter message. Not a phrase, a set of numbers, coordinates. Not symbolic coordinates, not metaphorical, literal geographic coordinates. I double-checked them, triple-checked. The coordinates point to a location tied to the one grandfather has been speaking to in this story. The in-world listener, not the real viewer. The person he has been guiding through this narrative. A location woven into the events long before the 3 nights. A location connected to the next step in the integration process. Jonas realized it before I did, which is why he vanished, why the division took him, or why the entities themselves might have. And now, child, you understand the truth the governments have been too afraid to accept. The 3 nights were not the end. They were the beginning. A calibration, a mapping, a quiet opening of the human mind. Phase 2 is contact. Before we continue, let me ask you something, not out of fear, but out of necessity. If the first phase required silence from the world, what do you think the second phase will require from us when the silence returns? Before I begin, child, understand this. Stories like this don't end. They simply move into the next room, waiting for you to follow. Everything before this moment, the sleepless, the symbols, the hum, the bodies that moved wrong, the shadows that no longer obeyed their owners, the places that remained awake, those were fragments, pieces, warnings, preparations. Phase 1 was the alignment. Now we speak of what comes after alignment, -- Phase 2, the return. And it is already happening, the countdown hidden in the hum. After isolating the coordinates, I revisited Jonas's final recording, my obsession ever since he vanished. I slowed the waveform down to 1/10 speed, then 100th. That's when I discovered something the division overlooked. Underneath the language, beneath the pulses, below the layered harmonics, was a rhythm, not random, not symbolic, a countdown. Each pulse was spaced at precise intervals, matching the Earth's rotational drift since the 3 nights. The countdown ends on a date only days from now, the same date marked on ancient artifacts bearing the sigil, the same date referenced in division files as projected reemergence, the same date carved in scratch marks on a stone recovered from a Siberian cave. A cave where 13 bodies were found positioned in a circle, heads tilted skyward, mouths frozen open as if in the middle of a chant. Those marks read, "They return when the quiet repeats." The quiet returns. In the last 9 days, the world has experienced unexplained micro blackouts, sudden drops in REM activity in multiple countries. Animals collapsing simultaneously in isolated incidents. People reporting déjà vu with increasing regularity. Reflections flickering a fraction of a second off. Shadows appearing longer at dawn and dusk. A rising hum beneath the threshold of human hearing, all pointing to one truth. The second silence is already building. The first time, it took 3 nights. This time, it will take minutes. Seconds, a moment. Enough for them to finish what they started, what they want. After compiling every detail, every anomaly, every shift in biology and physics, the purpose becomes disturbingly clear. The entities do not seek domination. They do not seek destruction. They seek integration, a merging of consciousness, a blending of perception, a joining of minds into a structure older than memory. The sleepless were prototypes, failed attempts, resistant nodes, rejected by the system. You and I, we are the compliant ones. We are the aligned. Do you understand the horror in that? Not that they changed the sleepless, but that they changed us, and we never noticed. We slept through it willingly. We surrendered without understanding we had surrendered, not because we were weak, but because they needed us, unaware. The human mind fights what it knows. It does not fight what it doesn't see happening. We did not see. We did not wake, and now they will return to complete the cycle. Jonas's last message. There was one more detail in Jonas's final recording, one that chilled me more than the countdown, more than the language, more than the coordinates. A whisper, a human whisper, not his voice, not any voice I recognized, a voice speaking in a near-silent tremor layered beneath the hum. A warning. I enhanced it until the distortion cleared, until the words became unmistakable. They left something inside us. Not infection, not possession, instruction, a seed of resonance, a pattern in the neural pathways, a dormant frequency waiting to be activated when the hum returns in its full strength. Every human who slept during the 3 nights carries it, including you, including me. Jonas was the anomaly because he woke too soon. He saw too much. His mind wasn't synchronized with the rest of us. He wasn't taken because he was dangerous to them. He was taken because he was incompatible. But the aligned, the compliant, the ones who slept quietly through all 3 nights, we are the ones they will come for. The approaching moment. In the last hour alone, I felt the vibrations growing stronger. The same pressure behind my eyes that woke me on the 3rd night. The same faint distortion at the edges of my vision. The same cold weight in my bones. It is beginning. I hear it. The hum is returning. Quiet. In the distance, like something vast is inhaling in preparation for another global exhale. A silence is gathering on the horizon, not the silence of fear, the silence of invitation. My final warning. I don't know if we will survive this. I don't know if there is survival in the sense we understand it. The division believed this was inevitable. Ancient cultures believed it was cyclical. The entities themselves seem patient, beyond time, beyond mortality. But before the second sleep begins, before the hum reaches its full amplitude, before consciousness dims across the world once more, I need you to consider a final question, not as a listener, but as someone who will soon decide whether to resist or surrender if something ancient and incomprehensible reached into your mind once and now reaches again to finish its work. Do you believe your humanity is strong enough to refuse it a second time? Stay awake as long as you can, child, for the world will not remain awake much longer.